or pattern reversal. That brings us to trend change, and it's a kind of a similar discussion along the vein that we were just on, which is a lot of traders might want to follow the trend, okay? And therefore they might say to themselves, well, continuation patterns are what I want to focus on. And that is fine. That is absolutely fine. But again, remember, trending patterns and non-trending patterns especially could break in either direction. Okay? One question you might ask yourself, is it the intraday trend I'm looking to follow, or is it the end of day trend? You definitely then want to keep both continuation and reversal options open. Okay, so far, if you've noticed, I've recommended that you leave the advanced search criteria for direction and trend change on the default, casting a wider net. Okay, we haven't really made any significant changes to the number of alerts that we would potentially get yet. Okay, because it's not a matter of simply having fewer alerts, but it's a matter of making sure that these alerts are really just a reflection of what you would be considering if you were doing this manually. All right? Okay, so moving on to the next criteria. Minimum pattern length. Okay, here is a criteria that you can absolutely incrementally change. A lot of traders may not like smaller patterns. You know, as you can see right now, this is set on 20 bars. Okay, if you find yourself getting too many alerts, overwhelmed, incrementally adjust this higher. What you will essentially get are larger patterns. And to varying degrees, larger patterns could be considered significantly more psychologically important. Okay? So one criterion, again, I recommend incremental changes. Don't go from 20 to 80. Go from 20 to 40 and see how that session's results in terms of the Autochartist alerts is affected. Okay? But this is one place that you can incrementally change to reduce the number of alerts and also slightly increase the psychological significance of the pattern alerts that you're getting, because now you're simply focusing on larger patterns. More candles must be involved in order for Autochartist to alert you to a chart pattern. Minimum of how many bars? The default is 20. You can crank that default up to a minimum of 40, and that might be a good place to start. The quality indicators. Okay, now here is something that, this is where we're really getting into the nitty-gritty of the patterns. Just talk about what they are, talk about which ones you can change and which ones I highly recommend you leave alone. So, minimum clarity, initial trend, volume, uniformity, breakout strength, and overall quality. Now, overall quality, I recommend you leave alone. If anything, if you wanted to, you could even turn that down, but again, remember that will give you more alerts. But I would not recommend cranking it any higher than the setting of 3 that it is defaulted to. The quality indicator, the reason I've started at the bottom of the list here is because the quality indicator is made up of the initial trend and the uniformity and the clarity. Okay? Those all yield, ultimately, the overall quality reading. Now, what is clarity? Well, I think these images here along the scales do a very effective job of explaining what they are. We're talking about price action here. We're talking about the quality of the price action. There's a certain amount of aesthetics here, isn't there? How many times have you looked at a pattern and said, wow, that just looks like a good example of a triangle. Wow, that's just a great example of a channel. It just visually looks good. It's aesthetically pleasing. Don't negate that, because to a certain degree, that is your brain trying to tell you something. Aesthetically pleasing patterns and charts tend to have a good organization, not a lot of random price movement, not a lot of gaps. The trend lines have nice steady touch points. There are things that we as human beings tend to cue in on in terms of balance and harmony, all these things that we would say go into the aesthetics of anything, a flower or a chart pattern. Okay, so don't neglect them because they are important. What Autochartist is attempting to do, and does so very effectively, is give you a more objective interpretation of that aesthetic of the pattern and price action. Okay, so if you are considering how this pattern looks, and visually you're trying to interpret what it is it's trying to communicate to you about the current market environment, what clarity will tell you is the degree to which price is organized or disorganized. And anytime I want to trade, I want clarity in my price action. There's a better chance of follow through. The price patterns that will emerge from high clarity will tend to be more aesthetically pleasing patterns. Price organization also is a reflection of what? The mood of the market, right? If there's a lot of noise in price action, is it correct to assume that perhaps there's a lot of confusion in the marketplace? That's been my experience. Okay? So one place you could crank up to reduce the number of alerts and specify more in a more detailed manner what it is you would like Autochartist to present you with as far as potential trading opportunities is go ahead and crank up that minimum clarity, because there is never going to be a time that I don't want at least some decent clarity on my chart. Now, I'm not going to recommend you crank it to 10. Don't get carried away. Again, incremental changes. If it's on 2, move it to 3. See how that yields, see the changes that yields in your results. Okay? Volume is not applicable to Forex, but if you are a stock trader, futures trader, I'm a big fan of steady volume. 2 might be a good place to start for that. And then again, you can crank that up as needed, observing the pattern alerts that you're getting and determining whether or not it's making an effective change to what it is you're looking at. Minimum uniformity. Now we're talking about the touch points that create the trend lines and support resistance that ultimately yield a chart pattern. Now remember, a chart pattern is simply the culmination of trend lines, support, and resistance. And it's the touch points that create those trend lines, support, and resistance. So part of the behavior of the touch points is considered here. In other words, are the touch points spaced evenly throughout the life of the pattern, or are they all congregating in a couple of sections of the pattern? I like to see that they're spread out fairly evenly throughout the pattern. Again, that's a very aesthetic interpretation. Okay? But what we could then do is ask Autochartist, look, I know that I want a good amount of touch point balance, if you will, within my pattern. So, again, one of the things I can do is push that uniformity higher, okay, and see if the incremental change has yielded fewer patterns, and again, subjective I know, but a more aesthetically pleasing pattern. By the way, when a pattern is clear, does it also instill more confidence than an uglier pattern? That's been my experience. Okay? So again, incremental changes. This is about touch point balance. Are the touch points that create the trend lines and or support or resistance spread evenly throughout the life of the pattern? Minimum breakout applies to specifically completed patterns. So when I'm looking at a completed pattern and I see that the pattern's broken, part of the consideration that Autochartist will have as far as a